Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal progressive democracy is the 1% richest, plus their 9% enablers, versus the 90% rest of us. And once you see politics through that lens, the left can never lose an election again. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are Labour Party candidate for the mighty Tamaki Makaurau, Karen Leone, listener, columnist and militant cyclist Simon Wilson, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton. Tonight's 1-on-1 and 10 is the leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins, on ACT New Zealand First immigration campaigns, the unprecedented civil war between National and New Zealand First, and latest polling showing the majority of New Zealanders don't trust this government to manage the energy crisis. Our extra 1-on-1 tonight is former British High Commissioner, former Auckland Mayor and former Labour leader Phil Goff on the fight between the Foreign Minister and Prime Minister over Iran, what knowing Luxon support for America means, and the latest Trump threats. Shout out Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. You make this show one of the most watched live podcasts in New Zealand, and your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that's holding the fourth estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter. Hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's week 10 of Donald's illegal war on Iran, and President Trump had to be visited by the King of England to be reminded what the 250th birthday of America was about, with a series of speeches where the king dropped some truth bombs. Doesn't it say something about the state of America, which Donald Trump has corroded, that it requires their previous king to come back 250 years later and remind them what the values of Anglo-Saxon democratic Western values are? The rights of the individual, an independent judiciary, separation of powers, free speech, all things that Trump has trashed. A day after the king visited, Trump attacked his political enemy James Comey with trumped-up charges over seashells, which the MAGA cultists have argued amounted to a death threat. This could possibly be the saddest 250th birthday ever. In other news, now we know that the Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, actually did want to support America and Israel's illegal war in Iran. We need to ask some questions. The Prime Minister is very vocal about his evangelical faith, and in light of knowing that he wanted to support Trump and Netanyahu, we must ask, who would Jesus bomb? Now, comrades, I'm no theologian, but my basic skim of the whole Jesus Christ vibe is that he wouldn't be much of a killer, you know? I just don't see the Prince of Peace signing death warrants and plotting missile strikes. In Jesus' version, the lion lays down to sleep with the lamb. In Chris Luxon's version, the lion drops a Tomahawk missile on 165 school children. Jesus kinda comes across as a bit of a pacifist, to be frank, and would find the use of state violence to be abhorrent on most fronts, I should imagine. Again, no student or follower of Christ, the way the Prime Minister is, but I'm fairly sure Jesus would be pretty critical of any Democratic leader who got a war hard-on and wanted to have us betray every lesson from Anzac Day and skip gleefully into the shadow of the valley of death. Thoughts and prayers to the Prime Minister at this difficult religious moment. And finally this week, you know it's election time when the political right start booting immigrants with New Zealand First and ACT attempting to out-redneck each other with their latest immigration policies. On one hand, we have a tsunami of butter chicken from New Zealand First, and on the other, we have Timu Ice from ACT. ACT wants to challenge any immigrant to make sure they'll live up to some ill-defined set of New Zealand values while building a Trumpian ICE unit that will start deporting overstayers. Comrades, I'm a tad confused. While Winston is raging against the migrants, he opened New Zealand up for rich foreigners to buy $5 million mansions. And I haven't heard ACT say jack about overstayers while they were in power. And yet suddenly, 6 months before an election, we need to copy Trump with a special immigration unit to force overstayers out of the country? Here's what I don't understand. Last week, while ACT were proposing we create an ICE force for overstayers, David Seymour overruled OIO advice to not sell 3 South Otago farms to foreign investors while reforming the OIA to make it easy for foreigners to buy up sensitive New Zealand assets and land. So help me out here, folks. When it's rich pricks from overseas buying up million-dollar mansions or South Otago farms, New Zealand First and ACT can't bend over backwards fast enough to allow that. But when it's the poor, desperate, or exploited migrant workers, suddenly it's deportation camps and dawn raids. The rest of you are seeing this, right? New Zealand First and ACT are not offering solutions. They are playing to the bigotry of their base. These aren't dog whistles, they are canine trumpets, and we should reject racism because blaming immigrants for the economic malaise this government has driven the country into is not just a false narrative, it's also beneath our mana as a people. Remember, mates don't let mates vote ACT or New Zealand First. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first, this week's 1 on 1 in 10 with Labour Party leader Chris Hipkins on ACT and New Zealand First immigration campaigns, the unprecedented civil war between National and New Zealand First, and latest polling showing the majority of voters don't trust this government to manage the energy crisis. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Great to talk to you, as always, Bomber.
Chippy, ACT and New Zealand First have both proposed ugly immigration policy for the weakest migrant workers, while bending over backwards for rich migrants who can buy up our farms and homes. How bullshit is that?
Oh, look, it's just typical right-wing politics, which is find someone to blame for the situation the country finds itself in, don't accept any share of responsibility for the consequences of the decisions that you've taken as a government. This is totally their modus operandi. Immigrants are not responsible for the situation,
right?
The economic situation the country finds itself in.
I put to you earlier this year that a 40-year-old Pākehā woman I know who cleans for a living has been told by her bosses there is less work because migrants are undercutting them on price, and that's why she's voting New Zealand First. Because we do such a crap job looking after our own working classes, they look at migrant workers with a level of jealousy and resentment. Surely the solution here is universal union membership for every migrant worker to make sure they are paid the same and not being exploited.
The solution is absolutely to look at employees, workers, rights at work. Things like the minimum wage matter. And this government, have increased the minimum wage by less than the rate of inflation, which means minimum wage workers, whether they're New Zealand born or migrant, are all going backwards in economic terms. The real issue here is making sure that hard work pays off. This government aren't interested in that. They would rather give preferential treatment to billionaires who want to buy a little bolt hole in case things go wrong in whichever part of the world they're actually in, where most of their money is. They want to basically buy their way into having an insurance policy of being able to come to New Zealand. This government's rolled out the red carpet for them, and yet the migrants who come to New Zealand and work bloody hard every day, contribute to our economy, do enormous things that support all of us, are basically being told by this government they're not welcome. So my challenge to David Seymour and to Winston Peters is, who's going to work in the rest homes? Because ultimately we rely on migrant workers there. Who's going to work on the farms and in the orchards?
Right.
And if they start taxing those people more, who's ultimately going to pay for that? It's going to be your mum and your dad, or your gran and your granddad in the rest home, or it's going to be all of us at the supermarket when we're having to pay this extra tax, which they're now going to levy.
We wouldn't need mass immigration policies if we had our own workforce, but it's bloody expensive raising kids. Oh my God, my daughter costs me an arm and a leg, Chris. She's eating me out of house and home. Why don't we have 12 months maternity leave, nationalise early education and make it free, plus bonding student loans so graduates don't flee overseas to pay student debt off? If we want more babies and more workers for tomorrow, why not do something meaningful for working mums and dads and students now?
Well, I think you've highlighted a real contradiction with the parties on the right, who basically won't acknowledge the fact that the population replacement rate in New Zealand, i.e. the number of babies we're having, is less than we need in order to basically keep up with, the overall population demographics.
Yeah.
So we are reliant on migrant workers coming into the country to fill those jobs. They've opposed everything extending paid parental leave, extra support for families with kids. They basically put up hurdles all the way along. Free early childhood education for 2-year-olds, one of the first things they cancelled when they came into government after the last election. It was an extension of free early childhood education that I put in as Prime Minister, and it was one of the first things that they cancelled.
I need to ask you about this extraordinary situation between National and New Zealand First, with Winston metaphorically firebombing the Prime Minister's electorate office last week by releasing emails showing the PM wanted to support this illegal war against Iran. 2 questions. Firstly, what does this say about Winston's willingness to destroy National to cannibalise their vote? And secondly, what does it say about the Prime Minister wanting to support a war that no Kiwi had a hand in making and which is crippling whānau at the petrol pump?
Well, first things first, I have never seen a Prime Minister accuse a minister in their own government of placing politics ahead of the national interests, and yet that minister stays in the job. When that minister is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it doesn't get much more serious than that, and it shows how weak Christopher Luxon is within his own government, that there is no consequence to one of his most senior ministers putting their political interests ahead of the national interests. That's the first thing. But the second thing is the fact that Christopher Luxon was in this position in the first place is because he wanted to go in and support an illegal war. And for once, Winston Peters seemed to be the only one who had a bit of common sense here and saying, hang on a minute, this isn't such a good idea.
Exactly. When Winston has to be the check and balance, shit just got cray. Chris, we are hearing terrible stories from food banks that people don't have the petrol money to afford collecting their food parcels, and cancer patients unable to afford to drive to Auckland from Northland for their chemotherapy. This is egalitarian Aotearoa New Zealand, the first country where women won the right to vote, the first country to establish the 40-hour working week, and one of the first that stood for nuclear free. No New Zealander ever should be forced to choose between chemotherapy and having food because they can't afford the bloody petrol, should they?
Well, look, as part of my preparation for this year's general election campaign, was reviewing the transcripts of the leaders' debates from the last election earlier this afternoon. And I went back and I remembered all of the promises that Christopher Luxon made hard-working New Zealanders about how they were going to get a whole lot of extra support. $250 a fortnight for families with kids. And yet he can't name one single family that has received the $250 a fortnight that he promised. And his latest response to the fuel crisis is to say that a handful of families with kids who are working full-time will get extra support. If you're working part-time, you're on your own. If you don't have kids, you're on your own. If you're a superannuitant, you're on your own. If you're living on a benefit, you're on your own. This government have basically turned their backs on the vast majority of New Zealanders and said they just don't want to know how tough it is for them.
On Te Ao with Moana on Māori TV last week, Winston told Moana that he needed 3 terms to fix the problems that you and Labour created. What would 9 years of Winston's culture war malice and policy for donors look like, do you think?
Well, good grief. Winston Peters has been part of every New Zealand government, with the exception of the Key government, since 1990. And yet he still manages to somehow pretend as if he's got nothing to do with any the decisions that have been taken during
Right?
that time.
Yeah.
I mean, Winston Peters is up to his eyeballs in the decisions that have been taken over the last 30 or 40 years that have ended up in with New Zealand in the mess that it's in now.
I think 9 years of Winston, New Zealand would just be one giant open cast mine with a racetrack right around the lip of it for the gambling, and everybody working in the mine would have to smoke mandatorily tobacco, and there'd be a drift net from New Zealand to the Cook Islands, and the fish would have to smoke tobacco as well. I don't think 9 years of Winston is the solution to anything. In Horizon research released exclusively to Newsroom this week, 56% of New Zealanders had no confidence or not very much confidence that the government can manage the worst fuel crisis in New Zealand history. The government's belief is that while they will secure supply, as they have done with Singapore, the magical free market will create a price destruction that will leave many, many, many Kiwis behind. Is that what we do in this country? Only look after those who the right think are worthy?
Well, I mean, if you're a right-wing government, that's exactly what they do. They look after the people who they think are worthy and forget about everybody else. The reality here is there's about three things the government need to be doing in the fuel crisis.
Yep.
One is making sure we can access the fuel. Second is supporting people with the high price of fuel. And third is having a plan for what we're going to do out the other side of this fuel crisis in terms of how we're going to rebuild the country.
Yes.
Well, the first one, who knows whether they're succeeding or not on that? We'll only find out whether they've done a good job of securing supply if it fails.
Right.
And then on the second two, they're failing abysmally. They're not supporting people through the high prices, and they certainly don't have a plan for the future.
Finally, Chippy, looking at the deteriorating relationship between National and New Zealand First, should Kiwis prepare for a snap election?
Oh, turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas. There's just no way that they're going to give up the baubles of office early in an election that they're going to lose.
Thank you, comrade. Your insight and oversight is always amazing. We'll speak again with you next month.
Good to talk to you as always.
Cheers, Chippy. Thank you, mate. The political panel all stars up shortly, Whānau, but now this week's extra 1-on-1 in 10 with former British High Commissioner, former Auckland Mayor, and former leader of the Labour Party, Phil Goff, on the fight between the Foreign Minister and Prime Minister over Iran, what knowing Luxon's support for America means, and the latest Trump threats. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful, Phil.
Yeah, kia ora, Bomber. Good to be on the show again.
Thank you. Comrade, I've been covering politics for 31 years now, a terrible waste of life to be sure, but I have never witnessed a foreign minister outing the Prime Minister over a foreign policy decision the way Winston just did to Luxon. By exposing such a huge policy decision like this, is it Winston first or New Zealand first we're seeing here?
Oh, it's just straight politics by Peters. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Luxon's office was trying to pretend that he's admitted that it was a mistake and regretful about it. It was no mistake. He deliberately set out to throw Luxon under the bus. He knew that Luxon's position on backing the Americans was supported by less than 13% of New Zealanders. 87% of New Zealanders believe that the United States' attack against Iran was wrong. And there he was, putting it down and writing in an email through his Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet Office to say, actually, we should be following the Australians and the Canadians in supporting this American attack. Now, Chippy was very generous to Peters in saying that Peters had more sense than Luxon. Well, he did, but everything is relative. Luxon is wrong.
Right?
Luxon is wrong to want to have backed the Americans who went into this without consultation, without a plan, without a strategy, without a clear objective. And Peters doesn't want to condemn the attack as being contrary to the Charter of the United Nations that New Zealand is a signatory to, doesn't want to condemn it for being against international law. He wants to sit quietly on the fence. Well, that's a strategy, and it's better than Luxon's position.
But it's not moral, is it?
I mean,
it's not a moral position,
look,
is it?
What are we as Kiwis proud of? We're proud of the fact that we have a history as a country of going out, standing behind our values, speaking up for our interests, and being independent in the views that we express. Now, if I was foreign minister, would I be directly attacking Trump? No, I'd probably be a bit more diplomatic than that. But I would be saying quite clearly that we would have nothing to do with the illegal attack on Iran that is both doomed to failure, doomed to cost not only our country, but the whole of the world economically,
Yes.
and has cost the destruction of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure and innocent lives. I mean, I see this week that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, I think they call it now, they don't pretend that that's about defence, it's about war. He was saying that he wanted out of Congress $1.5 trillion, an increase from the $1 trillion for defence. They've already spent tens of billions of dollars. And what have they achieved out of this war? They've achieved the closure of the Strait of Hormuz that was open before. They've changed the regime. Really? No, not. They haven't changed it. They've got a more hardline version of the same regime. They've achieved absolutely nothing apart from creating economic chaos. And when the latest polls came out in the United States this week, it showed that 2-1, the Americans themselves are against what Trump has done.
Right.
So let's go back to your original question. This was a deliberate and treacherous act by Winston Peters to pull the rug out from under Luxon, to belittle him, to make him look stupid and to win votes from him. But Luxon is the person that created the problem for himself. He's followed in a long and not very proud history of National Party foreign policy.
Yes.
In Iraq,
yes,
both Brash and Key wanted to join the coalition of the willing to invade Iraq.
That's right.
Key came to deny that in 2007, but in the House, the Hansard records show that they voted in favour of providing every assistance to the Americans, a motion moved by Richard Prebble from the ACT Party. If you read the Rodney News, now I know the Rodney News is, everybody's talking about the Rodney News, but Key's on record as saying there, we should have been there beside our allies. So on Iraq, they were wrong.
Yep.
On Vietnam, they were wrong.
Yes.
On nuclear-free New Zealand, they were wrong. So good old Christopher Luxon is following a long and shameful history of not wanting to speak with our own voice for our own values, but simply be an echo chamber and say me too to the Americans. And anybody that says me too to the idiot that is running the United States at the moment, Trump, you know, the 80-year-old in a 80-year-old body with a 5-year-old mind, has to be out of their tree. Anybody could see 83% of New Zealanders said in the poll, the Ipsos poll, that the decision by Trump was going to be counterproductive.
Yes.
The average New Zealander had more common sense than Luxon, his cabinet, or his caucus.
By revealing what he did, has Winston damaged our credibility on the world stage?
Well, if I was a foreign minister or a prime minister or a president overseas looking at New Zealand, I'd say, well, which line do we believe? Do we believe the prime minister or do we believe the foreign minister? Because they're both saying different things.
Yeah.
They would look at this and say, if they showed any interest in New Zealand at all, they would say this is a coalition of chaos where they can't get their act together, where the foreign minister deliberately undermines the prime minister and the prime minister is too weak. Look, if this was Helen Clark and I had released an email that was designed to make her look stupid, I'd be gone by lunchtime, to use Brash's famous phrase.
By breakfast. Look, Phil, we just commemorated Anzac Day, where our collective mana and honour during war is remembered. To date, Israel and Trump have used horrifically unethical violence against the Iranians in their illegal war. They wrongly bombed a school, killing 165 of them were schoolgirls, and they assassinated the entire Iranian leadership team the day after the last negotiation to discuss terms for a ceasefire. Are those tactics, killing school children and cowardly assassinating negotiation teams, the kind of honour and mana worthy of the memory of the Māori Battalion or the Gallipoli forces or any New Zealand deployment?
Or the Americans that came ashore on D-Day at Omaha. No, it's not worthy of it. You know, through the Second World War, you know, it seems a bit strange, but there are rules in war.
Yes.
Where certain certain things that you do against civilian populations are regarded as criminal.
Right.
What did we hear Pete Hegseth say publicly? He said, we will not be restrained by those sort of rules.
Yeah.
What he's basically saying is, not only have we attacked Iran illegally, it's contrary to international law, it's contrary to the basic foundation principles of the UN Charter, but we're not going to be bound by Geneva Conventions either.
Right.
Now, this is a really sad thing. I go back to your comments about King Charles. I'm not a monarchist, but I have a real admiration for King Charles. I've met him on a number of occasions. I've had quite long conversations with him in the past. I rate him as a human being, as a diplomat, and as a person that has a strong sense of morals and ethics.
Sure.
And I just loved the way that he addressed the joint houses of Congress, talking about the need for checks and balances on executive power directed against Trump. Now, either Trump, it was too subtle for Trump, he didn't understand it, or, having offended the Pope and offended the Europeans and everybody else, he didn't want to offend the King of England. But I thought Charles did a superb job in reminding Americans what the founding principles of their constitution were about, and what a decent America should look like. And even in the speech he gave, a carefully crafted, well-crafted, humorous, sincere, excellently delivered speech.
Yes.
That's just a huge comparison to the rambling diatribes that we hear from Trump, where he contradicts himself within the space of a couple of different sentences.
The Prime Minister,
we live in interesting times.
The Prime Minister was willing to trade away our military mana and our military honour to side with an illegal war before he even comprehended the enormity of what Trump and Netanyahu had embarked upon. Is the Prime Minister out of his depth?
Oh, in foreign policy, absolutely. He clearly has no understanding of the situation. Look, there's that old term that is associated with Peters, but goes way beyond him. This is not our first rodeo. We've seen this before. A person with a basic understanding of politics would know that the United States was it's easy to get into a war. It's very hard to extract yourself from the war.
Right.
And when you go into a war, you've got to have clear objectives.
Yes.
Were there clear objectives? No. You've got to have a strategy. Was there a strategy? No. Was there a reason to actually respond to Iran? And I'm not a supporter of the Iran theocratic regime.
That's right.
They're awful people. But was there something that said we have to attack Iraq because this is part of self-defense, which would bring it within international law?
Yeah.
Well, the Pentagon's own intelligence said, look, there's not that in the next 10 or 20 years, there's not going to be a threat from Iran to the United States. And yet there was Trump talking about an imminent threat after he'd obliterated their nuclear capacity, we heard from him.
Right.
Then he was saying, but they're a threat. He's obliterated their navy, but somehow they've only managed to get 2 ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Look, one of the real problems, and this is what Americans themselves are saying in the latest poll, is that Trump is neither honest nor trustworthy. That's what 70% of Americans believe. It's what we should believe. It's what Luxon should understand. And the idea of coming in behind Trump, as he proposed to do, was just straight stupidity.
Finally, Phil, what should we be using our international voice for right now?
Well, I think we've got to take the advice that Carney gave to middle powers. New Zealand's not a middle power, it's a small country. But traditionally, and I know this from my own time as foreign minister, you make alliances on issues, coalitions around issues. You work with other like-minded countries, small and medium size, and you speak the truth, you speak to your values, you speak to your interests. You don't try to appease an aggressor, whether it's Trump trying to appease Putin or us trying to appease Trump.
Yes.
You've got to say, you've got to speak for your country's values. You've got to go out there and you've got to push for a way in which we can resolve this war before it does more economic damage to us, to the world, and waste more tens of billions of dollars on death and destruction that should be going into sustainability, climate change, making life better for people living in third world countries. The world, frankly, is in a pretty sorry situation when we see what's happening today.
Preach. Thank you, comrade, for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. It's always a pleasure, Phil.
Thanks, mate. All the best.
Cheers, brother. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panelist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the taxpayers' union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location, for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the weekly, sir.
Alarming. The war looks like it's starting up again in terms of not a standoff, but actual missiles and so forth. The economic data continues to be poor, including all the business and consumer confidence data on both sides of the Tasman and even in China to a certain extent. And the leader of the opposition just gave an interview and has nothing at all to say. And he rightly points to a whole lot of problems in New Zealand, but this isn't my first rodeo or your first rodeo. We've heard this all before. We've seen this political tactic before from John Key. We've seen it from Christopher Luxon, where you just sort of imply that you're worried about all these sorts of problems, but you don't quite get around to saying precisely what you would do about them. You don't even say that you'll reverse anything that the current government's done. You just sort of try and get through the 10 minutes without saying anything substantial. And I fear if there is a change of government, my eternal rule of politics will hold. It'll be worse than this one.
What a surprise your opening words would be just stomping repeatedly on Chippy's face. Our next panelist is frankly too good.
Nice guy.
Is frankly too good for the show. She should be busy doing something far more important than wasting time talking to me. Former Auckland mayoralty candidate and now standing for the mighty Tamaki Makaurau for the Labour Party. It's the ever-brilliant Karen Leone. Kia ora, comrade. Thank you so much for coming in.
Always good to be back here.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
I'm going to continue to say this. The struggle street is just so real for our whānau out there. Agree with the sentiments that you said, that people are, choosing between not coming down here to get chemo because they cannot afford the petrol. It's just ridiculous.
Heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. Last but certainly not least, he's one of Auckland's most important voices. There's no point subscribing to the Herald anymore. Now he's left. High-ranking left... maybe Hooton. High-ranking left-wing Jedi and militant cyclist, listener columnist Simon Wilson. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora,
welcome to the
kia
show.
ora to you.
One word to describe the weekly, sir.
Before I give you my word,
Yes.
Karen Leone, you're a Labour Party candidate now. You have nothing to say to defend your leader against the attack he's just come under?
That's a good point, Simon.
Yeah, no, look.
Very good point.
All of the things that you brought up today, of course, I disagree with a lot of the points because we are very strong on what we are putting forward, and we just had Chris Hipkins on the show.
And because you're on 37% too, so suck it. Right? You're on 37. Suck it. Suck it, Hooton.
Okay, my word. I was looking at National, I was thinking it would be train wreck, and then I was thinking it would be Google-eyed fascination, but actually my word of the week is Singapore. 3 quick things about Singapore. The first one is that Luxon has managed to a degree to reduce the issue that we're facing to supply.
Yes. No.
Only supply,
Yep.
not cost. It was left to Lawrence Wong, the Prime Minister of Singapore, to point out we are facing a good 6 months of much higher prices if we're lucky.
Yes.
The second point is that something Chippy said when he said that Winston was the only one in Cabinet who faced down Luxon. I don't believe that. If he was the only one, the National Cabinet Ministers surely would have overruled Winston. Luxon would have got his way. I imagine that Cabinet has a lot of National Party ministers in it who were horrified at what Luxon said. Even though Luxon was channeling the position that Key and others have taken in the past, they knew the numbers, they knew what New Zealanders thought about this, and they would have been horrified. And that brings me to my third point. Why was Nicola Willis in Singapore? She's in the late stages of writing a difficult budget at this moment. Luxon took her with him to Singapore. What happens when politicians, prime ministers, under enormous stress from within their own party,
always
leave the country?
I know. He packed her in a suitcase. There will be no coup. There will be no coup.
He packed her in a suitcase and took her with him. Which you've got to say displays perhaps a rare moment of political nous.
That's the only
honestly,
time.
it's clearly that dangerous, and clearly his days are really starting to be numbered now.
Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1. Has the sly silver fox jumped jumped all over the lazy blue hog. Is Winston attempting to manufacture a snap election? Issue 2, Act in New Zealand First immigration policies. Whose dog whistle is loudest? And issue 3 tonight, should New Zealand help Trump open the Strait of Hormuz to help combat the cost of living crisis? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show. Each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on Karen. As soon as the mics are off, she swears like a sailor. Let's kick things off with issue 1, and that is the unbelievable situation where the foreign minister metaphorically firebombs the Prime Minister's electorate office in a drive-by shooting by releasing emails showing our Prime Minister had a political hard-on for joining America in Israel's illegal war against Iran. Matthew, the Inter-Islander today doubled its fuel surcharge. Maersk added a 27% surcharge for all New Zealand routes, and the Singapore PM, as was pointed out, warns of 6 months of pain to New Zealand on petrol prices. Is the reality of this energy crisis finally starting to be appreciated, and what does that mean for the economy and the election?
I'd just like to comment first on the situation of the emails, which was the first thing you asked about, and the overall situation and commentary about what the Prime Minister was seeking. I think many people, including you and Simon, Karen, are giving the Prime Minister probably too much credit. In the sense that there is a case that could be made, and they wouldn't necessarily agree with it, but I think Hipkins or Jacinda Ardern or Bill English or John Key or Helen Clark or Jenny Shipley or Jim Bolger or Mike Moore or Jeff, I could keep going.
You could.
They could have competently made the case that, whether they agree with it or not, that New Zealand should stand with the Americans because that's in our security interests. They could also, all of them have made the case that New Zealand should stand independent from this war in Iran, and they would have done that competently. And all of them, I think, could have communicated the nuanced position that was written by Ben King of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to try and reconcile the views.
Is incapable of that?
I think, I think he didn't perhaps understand what he was signed off. And I think this goes to the significance. It's not that there was a big discussion where Peters is saying, let's go with acknowledge, and Luxon is saying, no, we should support the Americans. I think anyone who thinks that overestimates the Prime Minister's ability to make a political case. I think what happened was on the Sunday, the 2nd of March, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and Mr. King wrote that press statement, agreed on that press statement, and it was issued to the world on the night of Sunday, the 2nd of March. And then, of course, the next day, the Prime Minister was unable to competently carry out his interviews or his press conference on the matter. And so it was only after that he started saying, oh, well, maybe we should support it. And people seemed, and of course, it was too late by then. Yes. I mean, the Prime Minister says his job is to challenge advice, and it is, but he had done that on the Sunday and he'd agreed with the advice. And it was, I don't think he really understood the significance of saying he wanted to support the Americans. I think we should just consider that words. And of course, Mr. Peters had to fight back, and Mr. King, because even if the Prime Minister was right and we should support the Americans, it was too late by then, and we would have looked flaky because the Prime Minister had already outlined New Zealand's position 48 hours earlier. So I don't think this is a serious thing. I think it's just more of what happens within the Luxon government when ministers engage with the Prime Minister.
So many shankings in one sentence. Follow-up question. The fact that the Prime Minister can't even sack Winston for this drive-by shooting last week highlights how weak the PM is, doesn't it? I mean, now Winston knows he can get away with it. He'll do this all the way up into the election, won't he?
Well, yes, and it's a little bit like the Iranians. The Iranians can't win the war, but they have learned, and most of us were taught this in primary school social studies, the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, but Donald Trump and Christopher Luxon seem not to have done that part of the standard 2 social studies course. But it was always this theory that Iran, if there was a war, they would be able to control the global economy
every time,
shutting it down.
Yes.
it was never tested. It now has been tested, and it's got nothing to do with the Navy. I don't know what Phil Goff was going on about. It's because they can just put a single drone in the air,
right,
and they can sink or damage a supertanker. And so Winston Peters, and it's similar in that the Iranians can't win, but the other side can't win. And I think that is the same. Luxon can't sack Peters. But Peters can't really do much else either. So there's a parallel there.
Karen, unemployment is 6.3% in Tamaki Makaurau, a full point higher than the national average, and it's 11.1% for Māori, with 16.6% for Māori youth. Beyond the tantrums of Trump and the weird fight between Luxon and Winston, this war is causing a level inflation for those without work that is undermining our communities and corroding social cohesion. What needs to happen?
Oh, look, the big concern that we've got, especially for Māori right now, is that a lot of our talented Māori are leaving and going to Australia.
Right.
It's the biggest numbers that we've ever seen.
It is.
And actually, if we don't see or provide a future for Māori here in Tamaki Makaurau, it's such a significant part of the population. I think we've looked at the stats, and Māori and Pacifica will be a majority of the working population in Tamaki Makaurau, I think, within the next 30 years.
Sure.
So, look, I'm really concerned that there's been so many things that have been scrapped in terms of trades training, opportunities for Māori and Pacifica to navigate coming into work, or getting into work, and opportunities for them. As well as our education system. What are we doing there to really make sure that we've got opportunities for them going forward? So look, no, I'm really concerned about our economic chaos and crisis at the moment for the whole country, but particularly for Māori, given we've got a huge population here in Tamaki Makaurau.
Follow-up question. Every respected commentator in this field are saying petrol will permanently be above $90 for the rest of this year, meaning the pain that people are feeling and they're going through right now is only going to get worse. That $50 extra a week for some won't go far, and for the poor, it won't even begin. What happens when people actually can't afford it anymore?
Oh, the $50 is not making a huge difference, I believe, at the moment, and I don't even know what the stats are on people accessing that $50. We haven't seen the actual numbers on that come through. But what I can say is I'm still trying to promote for our whānau to use public transport. And that $50 weekly cap.
It's pretty good, eh?
Yeah, it's really good. And I think we need to try and push that as much as possible.
So many people don't know it.
Whānau. They just don't know. They're not aware. And this has always been the issue about local government versus central government. There's always so much more of a focus in terms of media on what central government is doing. But the day-to-day living for Aucklanders and for our whānau, they would benefit so much from things that are coming out of local government if they only knew it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Simon, the Prime Minister has said that the Foreign Minister... The Prime Minister has said that the Foreign Minister is putting party politics before the national interest. Winston Peters must be sacked, mustn't he?
Well, I think we've learned a lot from this whole episode. We've learned that Luxon's not in charge. That's obvious. We've learned that he has a flimsy grasp of the issues. We learned that he's actually wrong. We've also learned that he can't maintain discipline, that he's out of his depth in a crisis, and that he can't read the room. And that being out of his depth in a crisis is the most important one to me. We have leaders for all sorts of reasons, but the most important reason we have political leaders at all is to manage a crisis. He has the wrong instincts in a crisis. This one raises out the cost of living, but for New Zealanders, it doesn't do a lot else immediately. It does an awful lot for people living in the Middle East, of course. But this won't be the only crisis that he, if he's re-elected and stays as Prime Minister, this won't be the only crisis he faces, and his instincts are terrible on it. So that's a real problem, I think, for us. But when it comes to Winston Peters, people have been saying that coalition stability, we're not going to go into an early election because what did Phil Goff say? Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. That's nonsense. National needs to project stability, and therefore National wants the coalition to run its course. Winston Peters doesn't care about that. Winston Peters wants 20% out of the next election, 25%, whatever he can get. He wants a substantially increased majority, so he is positioning himself right now to be the voice of the common people against this lunatic loser Luxon, who is so out of his depth. Wait for the budget. Will Peters support the budget, or will Peters find a way to say, actually, Nicola Willis, Christopher Luxon have betrayed New Zealanders, we can't support it, and bang.
Well, that's what I want to ask. Follow-up question. New Zealand First strategy, it seems, is to pig butcher Luxon and bleed National out by cannibalising their vote all the way up until the election. Should New Zealand get ready for Prime Minister Winston Peters?
I don't know that it's going to be Prime Minister Winston Peters. I've said that before, but you'd have to say he looks a little more likely to have that in his potential future now than he used to.
Right.
I really don't think we need to be saying that's what's definitely going to happen at all. But the showdown could be coming soon, and Peters clearly has the view that his party has an enormous potential to grow. Is that actually true? Or is he going round and round in circles with a relatively smallish group of people who are cheering him on, and he's working in a bit of an echo chamber himself? We don't really know the answer.
I think that's the big question. I really think that's the big question going into this election. I get a sense that New Zealand First activists online are so radioactive and so unbelievably toxic in their messaging that people look at that and go, oh, Jesus, no. I may not like those people, or I may not, but I don't hate these people.
It could backfire on them terribly. There's an awful lot of people who are, the
who enjoy decency, who actually like decency and civility.
Also like stability.
Yeah. Quick round. Will New Zealand First manufacture a snap election, and when? Matthew Hooton.
Well, if they're going to,
yes,
it'll be before the budget. The budget will have to be signed off by the Cabinet. And, there's a number of New Zealand First ministers there. If they were to sign it off in Cabinet in the next fortnight or so and then vote against it in Parliament, I mean, that would be ridiculous. So if there is to be a crisis around the budget, I would think it's going to happen not on the Monday, but maybe Monday week. And in some ways, it's to the government's advantage, or the National Party's advantage on that point, that the budget has essentially had to be redone because all the forecasts have been made out of date by Trump. So if it happens, if it's going to be happening on the budget, about 2 or 3 weeks.
Karen.
I don't think it's going to happen. I think Winston's just doing what Winston does. But obviously the real concern right now is we should be addressing this fuel crisis and what's going on in the Middle East. So we should be prioritising that, not looking at a snap election for this
Simon, snap election.
I understand the logic that Matthew has just outlined, but he used the word, it would be ridiculous of Winston to...
He'd do it, he would. I heard the words, I thought,
ridiculous of Winston Peters. Those things do sit comfortably in the same sentence. So from the point of view of public optics, crashing the government before the budget, before we all know and are talking about what's in it, would seem to me to be bad politics, even though Matthew's right, they will have to sign off on it and then betray it. But put that budget up in Parliament and then manufacture the reason they can't support it after all.
I've got it. It's over. They're crazy.
Winston's not bad at manufacturing reasons.
Exactly.
So
Comrades,
I see it as after.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is a tsunami of butter chicken versus Timu ice between ACT and New Zealand First immigration policies. Whose dog whistle is the loudest? Karen, New Zealand has a long history of welcoming migrant communities and then hating on them the second the economy turns. We did it to the Pacifica community in the 70s, we did it to the Asian community in the 90s, and now it's Indians in 2026. Is this the way you express Manaaki in 2026?
Oh, well, first of all, I was very, very surprised that Matua Shane Jones, made that statement. especially being Ngāi Takoto myself, which he is also Ngāi Takoto.
Okay.
And,
Yep.
you know, we have worked very closely, well, I have, obviously, on the mayoralty, working our ethnic community.
Yes.
So I think it's just around it being a culture war in terms of coming into this next election.
Right.
You know, and I'm just really disappointed that he even used that language. So, yeah, no, very concerning.
Follow-up question, if we want more workers and don't want to rely on migrant labour, why not make it cheaper for working mums and dads to have kids, like 12 months maternity and free early childhood education? If we're going to do something big about it, if we're going to be real about it, surely that's where we're going to start.
Yeah. No, I agree with what you're saying there. We need to be providing support for these families that are coming in and working with us here in New Zealand. So, yeah, we need to have consistency for them.
Simon, why are we suddenly hearing about overstayers? I've never heard ACT talk about overstayers. In 2.5 years, suddenly, if there's such a problem, why not grant them amnesty rather than a Timu ICE force to deport them? Why not give them amnesty? Why not? If it's 20,000 people, let them become New Zealanders.
Because that's not the New Zealand way. We bully these people.
Right?
We don't support
Yeah,
them.
that's right.
I am a little bit puzzled by both ACT and New Zealand First's obsession with bashing immigrants. You would think that the older people get, the more likely they are to have experience of a retirement home.
Right.
Either because they're in one or because they've been looking at them or their parents are in one. And a public hospital.
Yes, yeah.
And anyone who's been into any of those institutions will know perfectly well they would not function at all without immigrants. We rely on immigrants to make this country work.
Right.
And we are the richer for it.
Yes.
And we are the more economically viable for it. So we're richer culturally, more economically viable. It is a good thing. And it helps us to understand that and to make the most of it. And I would have thought the more people experience what immigrants do in this country, the more they will understand.
Follow-up question. Labour and National have both used mass immigration policies in the past for lazy GDP growth. Isn't it understandable that domestic workers feel resentment for the lost jobs and the lack of infrastructure? You understand that feeling, right?
Yes, of course you do. You understand the feeling that everybody has when they can't get the doctor's visit they want, when they can't get moving on the road because of congestion, when they can't get their kids into schools they want.
And the right play to that resentment, right? The right play to that resentment.
Yeah. None of those things are caused by immigration. They are caused by the lack of planning of successive governments, national and Labour, let's say, over years.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to see how we get out of that because we don't have the money to build and build and build the way we need to. And we don't have the land to do it either. We can't just build more roads and that doesn't solve the problem, and on it goes. But to reduce it to immigration is to make us angry in ways that are just becoming so difficult to bear in this country.
Matthew, a tsunami of butter chicken versus Timu ICE. Why are immigration policies in election year always so woeful in this country?
I think because of the way in which Winston Peters originally attacked the government's policies in the early 1990s to welcome immigrants, to expand immigration. He did it in such a way that it wasn't a serious contribution to the economic debate. What it did is to not be completely liberal on immigration, felt racist.
Yeah.
So people didn't want to have a serious conversation. Now, look, there is a very good left-wing argument from the Webbs, from the 1930s, the famous economists, in labour market theory, that I don't expect anyone in today's Labour Party would be able to follow the argument, but Grant Robertson actually could. And Chris Hipkins criticised the current government for not raising the minimum wage enough. Well, New Zealand, last time I looked, has the second highest minimum wage in the world after Australia. And what Grant Robertson was trying to do was further increase it and also restrict immigration. And this is a way of depriving business, and this is left-wing economic theory, it's a way of depriving business from low-value, low-paid workers. So they are forced to invest in plant, machinery, innovation, and in training. And that raises productivity, which then it leads to economic growth and higher wages, justifies the high minimum wage, and also brings unemployed people into the workforce.
Yeah.
And you know, that makes a lot of sense. And ironically, I can see that tradition enacts policy, which I'll be in trouble with David Seymour for saying that he's influenced by the Webbs, and Grant Robertson. But it does seem to me that there is a legitimate left-wing, well, it's not even left-wing, there's a legitimate economic argument to be made to squeeze immigration very low and put the minimum wage up high and get some economic productivity growth that way. And it sure as hell isn't anyone's interest to have a high minimum wage in New Zealand and then bring a whole lot of immigrants in to work at probably illegally, in many cases, under that minimum wage. What the hell's the point of doing that? So it would be nice to see some coherence, but I doubt we'll get that from anyone.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Some of your final word this week is...
I just want to talk briefly about something that might sound completely different, and that is the Auckland Writers' Festival, which is next week.
Yes.
There is a whole host of international and local writers who are coming. This is probably the biggest cultural event that happens in the country over 3 or 4 days, from Thursday through to Sunday. It is going to have Jacinda Ardern on the last Sunday night, and she's been touring her book through the country, and I dare say that will fill the Aotea Centre, and also I imagine there might even be a placard or two against her outside. But this year there are a number of speakers who are coming, writers who have been influential in their thinking around international relations, the crisis of Trump, the climate crisis, the role of Indigenous people, those big political issues that play on much of what we've been talking about and affect us much more widely. It's a terrific program, and anyone who's interested in all those things, or if you're just interested in good books, have a look.
Thank you. Karen, your final word this week, please, ma'am.
Well, can I say the phrase enroll to vote?
Yes.
Look, we're just looking at the numbers at the moment. I think we have at least 40,000 Māori in Tamaki Makaurau that haven't enrolled to vote yet.
Come on, brothers and sisters.
We know the numbers 18 to 35 are going to be the highest voters for this year's election. But the big issue really is, democracy and just letting people know they've got to enrol because they won't be able to do it on the day.
Right. Matthew, your final word this week, please, sir.
Bouquets to the ACT Party and to Chris Hipkins. Both of them have come up with policies, and with ACT, whether you agree with it, there's the immigration policy. There's another one that you get students in the 6th and 7th of year 12 and 13, give them $500 and they learn to invest. And there's another policy they've come out with school buses and health. And it's good to see some policy coming out. And Chris Hipkins from the Labour Party has also done that, talking about moving away from universal superannuation and means testing it. And I think everybody in Labour and National knows that there have to be some cuts to superannuation of some sort. The National Party wants to raise the age of retirement, which Labour's against because they're worried about blue-collar workers. But at least there's a dialogue in both those main parties. Winston Peters will stop it, obviously, if he's a coalition partner of either Labour or National. But at least Chris Hipkins has made a big move from a Labour Party perspective of moving away from universal superannuation. Congratulations to him.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened immediately. We are a trading nation. Freedom of the seas is unequivocally a national interest, and we demand the Strait of Hormuz be opened immediately, not just because of the inflation tsunami heading our way, but because the fertiliser that has been held up won't be ready for planting season, and if not solved in the next fortnight, could see 10 billion meals per week lost to the hungriest and most vulnerable. Consider the possibility that we are, for the first time in 150 years, going to face a super El Nino. The last time that happened, the drought it drove led to famine that saw 3% of the planet's population die. If that was to happen this time, alongside the loss of 10 billion meals each week, this monstrosity could kill tens of millions from famine. The idea that there is any possibility of something as horrific like that happening demands the straits be opened now. Now, yesterday. Tens of millions dead from a self-manufactured famine seems like it should be a much larger motivator here than it is. So, no question that the Strait of Hormuz must be opened immediately to offset any famine of this magnitude. However, we didn't do this. We didn't start an illegal, ill-thought-out war. We didn't kill the Ayatollah's families and advisors. We didn't bomb that girls' school. We haven't agreed with Israel exporting their genocide from Gaza to Lebanon. We didn't kill journalists using double-tap tactics. We didn't screw up as magnificently as Trump has. Trump and Israel broke this. Trump and Israel fix it. And they do that by surrendering to Iran in return for reopening the strait. So yes, to opening the strait. No, to helping Trump and Bibi in their inane war on Iran. Our pressure globally should be on America and Israel to relent to Iran's conditions. We didn't break this. They did. They fix it. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small wetter in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.